It was a slow Thursday afternoon inside a high school classroom, the kind where the clock seemed to tick louder than the teacher's voice. The room felt heavy. Students slouched in their chairs, some pretending to take notes, others just staring out the window. The air carried the faint smell of eraser dust mixed with worn sneakers, the kind of smell every classroom seemed to hold. At the front, the calculus teacher scribbled another set of numbers on the board. He was sharp-tongued, the type who never missed a chance to make a sarcastic comment. Most of the time, students didn't know if they should laugh or just stay quiet. His voice filled the silence, but no one was really paying attention. Then a sound came from the hallway, a faint squeak, steady and familiar. The janitor was outside pushing his mop across the floor, moving with his usual slow rhythm. The teacher paused for a moment, marker in hand, and turned his eyes toward the door. A smirk tugged at his mouth. "Well, look who's here," he said, raising his voice so the class could hear. "Mr. Dorsey, tell me, think you can solve this one?" He tapped the problem on the board like it was part of a game show challenge. A ripple of laughter broke through the room. Not loud, not cruel, but uneasy. The kind that makes you shift in your seat because you're not sure if it's okay. Some students exchanged quick glances, eyebrows raised, waiting to see what would happen. The janitor stood in the doorway, mop still in hand. His forest green uniform slightly faded from years of work. His name stitched neatly on the pocket read L. Dorsey. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. He just looked at the teacher, then at the board, his face calm as stone. Instead of walking away, he slowly set the mop against the wall and stepped inside. His voice was steady, polite, almost too soft for the restless room. "Mind if I try?" The teacher lifted his brows, amused. "Be my guest," he said, waving toward the board. That was enough to make the students sit up straighter. A few phones slipped quietly out of backpacks, screens glowing as they were angled toward the front. Someone whispered under their breath, "Is he serious?" But no one dared stop him. The janitor picked up the marker, holding it firmly between his fingers. He studied the equation in silence. Not the way someone stares when they're lost, but like someone carefully tracing a path they already knew. His eyes narrowed just slightly, his breath slow and measured. The classroom grew quiet, unnaturally quiet. The laughter that had filled the room moments before was gone. All that remained was the faint hum of the air conditioner and the sound of a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. He lifted the marker, and with calm, deliberate strokes, he began to write. One number. One line, then another. He wasn't rushing and he wasn't showing off. He was simply working through the problem, step by step, as if he'd done this 100 times before. His voice came low, explaining what he was doing, each word clear enough for even the struggling students in the back to follow. "This here," he said softly, pointing to the symbols, "is a chain rule problem. You start by finding the inner function first. Once you see that, it all becomes cleaner." His tone wasn't the voice of someone trying to impress. It was the voice of someone teaching, someone who understood. The teacher crossed his arms, watching closely, but his jaw had tightened just a little. Around the room, students leaned in, their eyes fixed on the board. For the first time that day, no one was looking at the clock. No one was drifting off. They were locked in. Line after line filled the board, written neatly, carefully. He moved with quiet confidence, explaining each step, making it sound almost simple. Then, finally, he capped the marker, stepped back, and looked at the class. "That's one way to do it," he said, his tone almost casual. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was heavier than before, pressing against the walls. A junior in the back whispered, almost to himself, "He got it right." The teacher opened his mouth, but no words came out. The janitor gave a small nod, turned, and walked back toward the door. He picked up his mop, his footsteps soft against the floor as if nothing unusual had happened. But the students knew. Something had shifted in that room. Phones lowered slowly, eyes wide, hearts racing. The laughter was gone, replaced with something else. Curiosity, respect, and a question none of them could shake. Who exactly was the man they had just seen solve the problem better than anyone expected? The bell hadn't rung yet, but the classroom already felt different. Students who were half asleep before were now wide awake, whispering under their breath as the janitor disappeared back into the hallway with his mop. A junior named Marcus leaned toward his friend. Bro, did you see that? He just solved it like nothing. His friend shook his head, still staring at the board, the neat solution shining back at them like a hidden message. That was crazy. I didn't even understand half of it, but he made it sound so easy. The teacher, still standing at the front, cleared his throat. He rubbed the back of his neck and tried to brush off the moment with a forced chuckle. Well, sometimes even janitors pick up a thing or two, I suppose. His words were light, but his voice carried a stiffness, as if something about the scene had unsettled him. The students weren't buying it. Their eyes weren't on the teacher anymore. They were glued to the doorway as if expecting the janitor to walk back in at any second. Phones buzzed quietly as a few kids shared short clips they had managed to record. Little did anyone know those clips would soon spread far beyond the walls of that classroom. Outside in the hallway, Mr. Dorsey picked up his mop again, sliding it across the tiles in the same steady rhythm. To him, the moment had passed. He hadn't come in to prove anything, hadn't come to show off. He had only answered when asked, nothing more. But inside the classroom, the weight of what had happened lingered in the air like static before a storm. One of the students, a girl named Elena, raised her hand hesitantly. "Mr. Harris," she said, her voice soft. "Was he right?" The teacher froze for a moment, his pride caught between honesty and authority. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging just slightly. "Yes," he admitted, his tone clipped. The solution was correct. That answer only deepened the silence. Correct. The janitor hadn't just stumbled through it. He had solved it perfectly. Elena lowered her hand, but her eyes stayed fixed on the board. Around her, other students whispered, their voices threading together in a low hum of disbelief. "Wait, how does he know calculus?" someone muttered. "Man, I barely passed algebra and he just boom. Do you think he went to college?" The questions had no answers, but curiosity was a fire that had just been lit. Later that afternoon, as students spilled out into the hallways and crowded the cafeteria, the story spread faster than spilled milk. It was on everyone's lips. The janitor had solved a calculus problem that even some of the smartest kids struggled with. The clips from cell phones traveled from one screen to another, passed around like treasure. By the time the final bell rang, the janitor wasn't just the guy who mops the halls anymore. He had become a mystery, a riddle wrapped in faded work clothes and calloused hands. That night, group chats buzzed with speculation. Some students swore he must have been a math teacher once. Others joked that he had a secret double life as a professor. A few even claimed he was some kind of genius hiding in plain sight. But beneath the jokes, there was something deeper: respect. For the first time, kids who usually walked past him without a glance found themselves replaying the scene in their minds. The calm way he had picked up the marker, the patience in his voice, the quiet confidence in his hands, and maybe, just maybe, they started to wonder if there was more to the people around them than they thought. The janitor, meanwhile, walked home the same way he always did, his lunchbox in hand, his steps steady. To him it had been just another day. He had faced harder problems before in classrooms and in life. Solving one equation on a dusty whiteboard was nothing compared to the equations he had faced outside of school walls. But for the students, and even for the teacher, that day marked the beginning of something they would never forget. The story of the janitor and the calculus problem had only just begun. The next morning, the halls felt different. Students weren't talking about homework, the football game, or even who sat with who at lunch. Instead, they were buzzing about one thing: the janitor. Clumps of kids stood near lockers, scrolling through their phones and replaying the clips from yesterday. In each video, you could see the same moment: Mr. Dorsey calmly solving the problem while the teacher stood frozen beside him. Some videos had captions scribbled across the screen: "Our janitor is a genius. Plot twist of the year. When the teacher gets schooled." By first period, nearly the whole school had seen it. Marcus, one of the students from the calculus class, couldn't get the scene out of his head. He found himself staring out the window during class, wondering who Mr. Dorsey really was. The man who cleaned their halls every day, who rarely spoke unless greeted, had just shown knowledge most kids struggled to understand. It didn't add up. Even the teachers whispered among themselves in the staff lounge. Some chuckled, brushing it off as a lucky guess, but others looked uneasy, as though the event had exposed something they weren't ready to confront. How could a janitor solve what many of their own students couldn't? At lunchtime, Elena spotted Mr. Dorsey in the cafeteria, sitting alone at the corner table, quietly eating a sandwich from a brown paper bag. She nudged her friends and whispered, "That's him." For the first time, people actually noticed him. Heads turned, conversations hushed, and a few bold students approached just close enough to glance at his lunch, as if expecting something extraordinary there too. But Mr. Dorsey didn't act extraordinary. He ate slowly, neatly, and when finished, he folded the bag, tucked it into his lunchbox, and stood to leave. His quietness made him feel even more mysterious. After lunch, Marcus gathered the courage to follow him down the hallway. He found Mr. Dorsey pushing a cart of supplies, humming softly under his breath. Excuse me, Mr. Dorsey?" Marcus asked. The janitor paused, looked up, and smiled faintly.
"Yes, son?"
"That thing you did yesterday? In calculus. How did you know all that?" Mr. Dorsey's eyes softened, but his answer was careful. "I used to study things like that a long time ago." "Before I worked here," Marcus frowned. "So you were a math teacher?" "No," Mr. Dorsey said gently, shaking his head. "Not a teacher. Just a student who loved numbers." That only made Marcus more curious. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but before he could, the janitor picked up his mop and continued down the hall, leaving Marcus standing there with more questions than answers. By the end of the week, the story had spread beyond the school. Clips had surfaced online, racking up views. Comments flooded in. "Respect to this man. Hidden genius. Never underestimate anyone." Some even asked for his full story, demanding to know who he was before becoming a janitor. Back inside the school, whispers only grew louder. Some kids looked at him with admiration, others with disbelief. But one thing was clear. No one could look at him the same way anymore. Even the calculus teacher, Mr. Harris, couldn't shake the image from his mind. The way Dorsey had explained the chain rule so clearly, almost effortlessly, made Harris question his own pride. For the first time in years, he felt like he had been the student standing at the board. And yet Mr. Dorsey carried on as if nothing had changed. He unlocked classrooms in the mornings, swept floors after lunch, emptied trash bins in the evenings. His life looked the same, but under the surface a storm of curiosity and respect was growing. The truth was, behind his quiet hands and steady eyes lay a past no one at the school could imagine. A past that would soon come to light in ways that shocked them even more than that single math problem on the board. The following week, the whispers had grown too loud to ignore. Mr. Dorsey had become something of a legend in the school hallways. Students who once walked past him without a glance now greeted him with nods, smiles, even questions. A few bold ones tried to spark conversations, but he always answered in short, polite sentences before returning to his work. Still, the mystery only deepened. One afternoon, Elena sat in the library, flipping through her calculus notes. But her mind wasn't on the formulas. She kept thinking about that calm voice, the way Mr. Dorsey had broken down something that once felt impossible. She wondered how a man who cleaned floors for a living could explain math more clearly than the teacher himself. Finally, she decided to ask. The next day, she caught him outside the gym, wiping down a row of lockers. "Mr. Dorsey?" she began softly. He glanced up, rag in hand. "Yes, young lady, I don't mean to pry, but were you, always a janitor? Because you knew so much about calculus. More than any of us. More than most teachers." Mr. Dorsey's hand paused for a moment against the locker. A shadow of memory flickered across his face, then vanished as quickly as it came. He gave her a gentle smile. "No, I wasn't always a janitor. Life has its twists and turns, you know. I studied. I dreamed. But sometimes life doesn't ask what you want, it decides for you." Elena's eyes widened. "So you went to college?" "I did," he admitted. His voice was steady but tinged with something heavier. Regret, perhaps, or sorrow. "Mathematics. I loved it. Numbers made sense when nothing else did, but..." He trailed off, glancing at the floor as if the tiles themselves held the rest of his story. "But what?" she asked quietly. Mr. Dorsey exhaled slowly, folding the rag in his hands. "My mother got sick. Bills piled up. I left school to take care of her. Worked jobs one after another. By the time things settled, the doors I'd once dreamed of had already closed." For a moment, Elena didn't know what to say. She had expected an explanation, maybe even a secret talent, but what she got was heavier. It was sacrifice. "Did you ever think about going back?" she asked gently. A faraway look crossed his eyes as though he were staring at a younger version of himself. "I thought about it every day," he said softly. "But sometimes life requires you to set aside what you want, to do what's needed. And once enough years pass, dreams feel like they belong to someone else." Elena felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him it wasn't too late, that he still had brilliance inside him. But the words stuck in her chest. Instead, she just whispered, "I think you're amazing." Mr. Dorsey smiled again, but this time it reached his eyes. "Thank you, child. That means more than you know." As she walked away, her mind spun. This wasn't just about solving a calculus problem anymore. It was about a man who had once carried dreams bigger than most people could imagine, only to set them aside for love, for family, for survival. That evening, Elena told Marcus and a few others what she had learned. Soon the story spread again, only this time not as gossip but as respect. Students began to look at Mr. Dorsey not just as the janitor who solved a math problem, but as a man who had given up everything to care for the people he loved. The next morning, something small but powerful happened. A freshman held the door open for him. A senior offered to carry his supply bucket down the hall. Teachers greeted him with softer eyes. And in the calculus classroom, when the topic of that day's lesson grew too complex for the students, a single hand went up. "Mr. Harris," Marcus asked, half grinning, "do you think maybe Mr. Dorsey could explain it to us again?" The class erupted in laughter, not mocking this time but eager. For the first time, the teacher hesitated. For the first time, the janitor's name carried weight. And for Mr. Dorsey, who stood quietly in the hallway mopping floors, life was about to shift in ways he had never expected. By the end of the month, Mr. Dorsey's quiet act in the classroom had grown into something no one could ignore. It wasn't just whispers in the hallways anymore. It had reached the principal's office, the teacher's lounge, and even the local community outside the school walls. Clips of him solving that calculus problem were now being shared online, gathering thousands of views. Comments poured in, praising his calmness, his brilliance, and above all the humility in the way he carried himself afterward. "This man deserves more than a mop," one user wrote. "He deserves a classroom." Inside the school, the students' respect had only deepened. They greeted him warmly, asked about his day, and some even lingered after class hoping he might share another glimpse of his knowledge. For many of them, Mr. Dorsey had become a symbol, proof that brilliance could hide in the most unexpected places. One Friday afternoon, Principal Carson asked him to stop by the office. When Mr. Dorsey entered, wiping his hands on a cloth, the principal gestured for him to sit. "Mr. Dorsey," he began, adjusting his glasses, "I've been hearing quite a bit about you lately." Mr. Dorsey gave a small, polite smile. "I imagine you mean the incident in Mr. Harris's class." "That's exactly what I mean," Carson replied. "Students are still talking about it. Frankly, so are the teachers. You solved a problem that many of them admitted they would have struggled to explain under pressure. And more importantly, you did it with a kind of patience that captured the students' attention in a way I haven't seen in years." Mr. Dorsey shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't mean to cause a stir," the teacher asked, and I simply answered. The principal leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Mr. Dorsey, whether you meant to or not, you've inspired these students, and I can't help but feel that's worth more than we've acknowledged. Have you ever thought about teaching, even tutoring?" For a long moment, Mr. Dorsey didn't answer. His hands rested on his knees, calloused from years of work, his eyes searching the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I once dreamed of it, but life pulled me another way." The principal studied him carefully. "Maybe it's time life gives you another chance." Mr. Dorsey smiled faintly, but he didn't agree or disagree. He only nodded politely and excused himself back to his duties. But the principal wasn't the only one thinking that way. The following week, the math club held its after-school meeting, and several students decided to invite Mr. Dorsey. At first, he resisted, insisting he wasn't a teacher, but their persistence wore him down, and one evening he found himself standing in a circle of eager faces, a piece of chalk in his hand. What started as a simple explanation soon grew into something more. He didn't just write equations on the board, he told stories about them. He described how math wasn't about memorization, but about patterns, connections, and a way of seeing the world. His words lit up the room. Even students who usually struggled leaned in, nodding, whispering to each other. I get it now. The teacher who oversaw the math club stood at the back, arms folded, a look of awe softening into respect. Word of these sessions spread quickly. More and more students began showing up. Soon, the math club meetings had doubled in size, filled with kids who wanted to hear the janitor explain things in a way no textbook ever could. Then came the invitation. One morning, Marcus and Elena approached him nervously while he polished the trophy case in the hallway. Marcus held out a flyer. Mr. Dorsey, there's a state-level math competition coming up. Our school is entering a team, and we were wondering if maybe you'd help coach us? Mr. Dorsey looked at the flyer, then at the hopeful faces in front of him. His instinct was to say no. He wasn't a coach, wasn't a teacher. He was the man who mopped floors and emptied bins. But the light in their eyes gave him pause. They weren't mocking him. They weren't pressuring him. They simply believed in him, and it had been years, decades even, since anyone had looked at him that way. He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. You children don't give up easily, do you? Elena grinned. Not when we believe in someone. For the first time in a long while, Mr. Dorsey felt something stir inside him, a piece of the old dream he thought he'd buried forever. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll help, but only if you promise me one thing. What's that? Marcus asked. That you'll believe in yourselves as much as you believe in me. And just like that, the janitor who had once been invisible in the hallways was now stepping into the spotlight, not for himself, but for the students who saw more in him than a mop and a bucket. Little did he know, this decision would not only change their lives, it would change his own. The weeks leading up to the math competition became something the school had never seen before. What used to be quiet afternoons now buzzed with life in the math club room. Desks were pulled together, chalk dust hung in the air, and students who once dreaded numbers now showed up early, pencils ready. At the center of it all was Mr. Dorsey. He never lectured the way teachers did. Instead, he listened first. He asked students to explain their thought process, then gently guided them to see where they'd gone wrong. You don't fail when you make a mistake, he told them. You fail only if you stop trying. His voice carried a weight that made the words stick, not because they came from a textbook, but because they came from a man who had lived them. Elena, who always froze during tests, found herself growing more confident. Numbers are just puzzles, Mr. Dorsey reminded her, and puzzles are solved one piece at a time. Marcus, quick to give up when problems got messy, learned patience from him. Slow down, Dorsey would say. Rushing makes you blind. Let the problem show you where it wants to go. Even students who weren't on the official team began to show up just to listen. Some brought snacks, others brought friends. The room felt alive, almost like a family gathering. And in the middle of it, the man with the faded uniform and tired shoes suddenly looked more like the teacher he was always meant to be. But not everything was smooth. One evening, after a particularly long practice, Mr. Harris, the calculus teacher, stood at the back of the room with folded arms. When the session ended and the students left, Harris approached him. You're doing a lot here, Harris said, his tone cautious. Mr. Dorsey nodded politely. Just helping where I can. Helping, Harris repeated. Or taking over? His words were sharp, but underneath was something else. Pride bruised, perhaps even envy. Mr. Dorsey met his eyes calmly. I'm not here to take anyone's place. I just want to see these kids believe in themselves. Isn't that what we all want? For a moment, Harris didn't answer. His jaw tightened, then he gave a curt nod and walked away. The tension lingered, but Mr. Dorsey didn't let it shake him. He had faced bigger battles in life than another man's pride. The night before the competition, the students gathered one last time. They were nervous, fidgeting with pencils and whispering about the other schools they'd face. Mr. Dorsey stood at the front, hands clasped, his eyes moving from one anxious face to another. I need you all to remember something, he said quietly. Winning would be wonderful, but it isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is that you've already done what most people never do. You've believed in yourselves. You've worked, you've grown, and you've learned to see the beauty in something as small as a number on a page. That's victory enough. Elena raised her hand shyly. But what if we freeze tomorrow? What if we can't do it? Mr. Dorsey walked over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then you breathe. And you remember that mistakes are just proof that you're trying. Don't let fear steal what you've worked for. The room went quiet. His words carried more weight than any pep talk they'd ever heard. It wasn't just math advice, it was life advice. That night, while the students slept with nervous anticipation, Mr. Dorsey sat at his small kitchen table, looking at the flyer for the competition one more time. His lunchbox sat beside him, his uniform folded over the chair. For years he had accepted that his life was meant to stay in the shadows. But now, for the first time in decades, he felt like he had stepped into the light again. And yet a part of him still wondered, was he worthy of it? Could a man who once abandoned his dreams truly guide others to theirs? He sighed, picked up his glasses and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow it's not about me. It's about them." The next morning, the school bus pulled up outside, filled with chatter and nervous energy. Students carried backpacks stuffed with notebooks and pencils. Teachers offered hurried encouragement. But when Mr. Dorsey stepped onto the bus, the noise quieted for just a moment. He wasn't wearing his green janitor's uniform that day. Instead, he wore a plain button-up shirt, pressed carefully, and an old wristwatch that had once belonged to his father. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough to make the students sit a little taller. As the bus rolled toward the competition, Marcus whispered to Elena, "It feels like he's more than a coach. Like he's carrying us with him." And in a way he was. Because this competition wasn't just about math anymore. It was about second chances, about respect. About proving that no one's worth is defined by the job they hold or the uniform they wear. And for Mr. Dorsey, it was about finally stepping back into a dream he thought was lost forever. The auditorium was buzzing with excitement when the students from Lincoln High walked in. Schools from across the district were already seated, banners hanging, teachers whispering, and students sizing each other up. For Lincoln High, this was their first time even qualifying, and the weight of it pressed heavy on their young shoulders. Mr. Dorsey noticed their nerves the moment they sat down. Elena's hands trembled as she clutched her pencil. Marcus tapped his foot anxiously against the floor. He leaned closer to them, speaking softly. "Look around," he said. "Every student here is human, just like you. They're nervous, too. Don't see competitors, see fellow learners. Breathe, you belong here." The competition began with lightning-round questions. Numbers flashed on screens, judges read problems aloud, and hands shot up with answers. Lincoln stumbled early. Elena froze on the first question. Marcus answered too quickly on the second. A few students in the audience snickered, but Mr. Dorsey didn't flinch. He leaned forward, meeting their eyes. "Shake it off. Mistakes don't define you. Keep going." And slowly they did. By the second round, their rhythm returned. Elena solved a trigonometry problem with precision. Marcus cracked a tough algebraic equation step by step, no rushing this time. The team began working together, whispering strategies, double-checking answers. By the third round, something magical happened. The room, once doubtful, began to notice the janitor coach who stood quietly at the edge of the stage, nodding with pride at every correct answer. His students weren't just competing, they were thriving. The final round was the hardest, a brutal calculus problem that silenced the entire auditorium. Even the strongest teams hesitated. The problem stretched across the screen, dense with symbols and layered steps. The Lincoln team stared at it, panic flickering in their eyes. For a moment, no one moved. Then Elena whispered, "This looks like the one Mr. Dorsey showed us last week." Marcus's eyes widened. "Yeah, the trick with the substitution method." They bent their heads together, scribbling furiously. Sweat beaded on their foreheads. The clock ticked down, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. At the final second, Elena raised their paper high, her hand trembling. The judges examined it. The room went still. Then, the head judge looked up with a smile. "Correct." Cheers erupted from the Lincoln section. Students jumped to their feet, clapping, hugging each other. Elena covered her mouth in shock. Marcus pounded the desk with joy. For the first time, Lincoln High's name climbed high on the scoreboard. 3rd place overall. A spot no one thought they could reach. To the students, it felt like winning gold. As they left the stage, reporters and parents rushed forward. One asked loudly, "Who coached this team?" They came out of nowhere. Dozens of eyes turned toward Mr. Dorsey. He stood quietly in his plain shirt, his old wristwatch glinting under the lights. For a moment, he almost stepped back, uncomfortable in the spotlight. But then Elena tugged his sleeve and whispered, "They need to know it was you." So he stepped forward. His voice wasn't boastful, it was steady. "These students coach themselves. I only reminded them of what they already had inside." There was no laughter this time, no sarcasm, only respect. Even Mr. Harris, the calculus teacher, approached him with a hand extended. His pride seemed swallowed by genuine admiration. "I was wrong about you," Harris admitted quietly. "The school is lucky to have you." Mr. Dorsey shook his hand, his eyes misty. "No, sir. The school is lucky to have them." The bus ride home was a celebration. Students sang, cheered, and replayed the final problem over and over as if it were a championship game. Mr. Dorsey sat by the window, smiling quietly, watching the world blur past. For years, he had pushed a mop through these same hallways, unnoticed and underestimated. But today he wasn't just the janitor. He was a mentor, a teacher, a man who had given a group of kids more than formulas and equations. He had given them belief. That night, when he hung up his shirt and put his watch back on the dresser, he caught his reflection in the mirror. For the first time in decades, he didn't just see a janitor staring back. He saw the man he used to dream of becoming, and with a soft smile, he whispered, "It's never too late."